Welcome to this journey of one of the most disturbing cases in recorded history of Salem, Massachusetts. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment about where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts arrive. The year was 1898 when the final days of the 19th century cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Salem. A city once defined by its maritime prosperity had shifted into industrial prominence, though whispers of its more troubling past never truly faded from memory. The Spanish-American War had drawn many of the town's young men to service, leaving Salem's streets quieter than usual during that fateful autumn when the disappearance occurred. Fort Lee, the old Revolutionary War fortification on Salem Neck, had been garrisoned once more that year to house soldiers preparing for deployment. The fort, a star-shaped earthwork constructed originally in 1776, stood as a silent sentinel on the highest point of Salem Neck. Its presence had become so commonplace that most residents hardly gave it a second glance, despite its extensive military history through the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, and the Civil War. Now in 1898, it found new purpose as America engaged in the Spanish-American conflict. It was on October 17, 1898, when Dr. Phineas Winthrop failed to appear for his duties at Salem Hospital on Charter Street. Winthrop, a respected physician specializing in what was then termed nervous disorders, had established himself as a brilliant diagnostician whose methods sometimes defied conventional practice. A descendant of early Massachusetts settlers, he carried both the privilege and burden of his ancestral name. At 46 years of age, the doctor was known for his punctuality and unwavering dedication to his patients. His absence that morning caused immediate concern among his colleagues. The hospital staff waited until noon before notifying authorities. Many speculated that perhaps the doctor had been called to an emergency house call or had fallen ill himself. Yet, as hours turned into days, the peculiar nature of his disappearance became impossible to ignore. Dr. Egg. Winthrop had vanished without a trace, leaving behind no indication of his whereabouts or intentions. What follows is the account of his disappearance and the investigation that unfolded, compiled from police reports, personal journals, newspaper accounts, and testimonies gathered from those who found themselves entangled in what would become known as the most terrifying mystery in Salem history. Prior to his disappearance, Dr. Winthrop led what appeared to be an ordinary, respectable life. His residence on Chestnut Street stood among the Federal-style mansions built during Salem's prosperous shipping era. Though never married, the doctor maintained an active role in Salem's intellectual community, frequently attending lectures at the Salem Lyceum and contributing articles to medical journals regarding advancements in the treatment of mental afflictions. His approach to psychiatry was considered progressive for the era, often advocating for more humane treatments than those employed at larger institutions like Danvers State Hospital, located just miles away. Dr. Winthrop's housekeeper, Mrs. Abigail Putnam, was the last known person to see him on the evening of October 16th. Her statement to investigators, documented in the Essex County Police records, described the doctor as unusually preoccupied during supper. He barely touched his food, she recounted, and kept glancing at the window as though expecting someone. When I inquired if he was expecting a visitor, he simply said, "Not a visitor, Mrs. Putnam." A revelation. After the meal, according to Mrs. Putnam, the doctor retired to his study, where he remained until she departed at 8 o'clock. Nothing in his behavior suggested plans for travel or extended absence. His medical bag remained in its customary place by the door, and his appointment book showed scheduled patients for the following day. Yet by morning, Dr. Winthrop was gone. His bed appeared undisturbed, suggesting he had never retired that night. A thorough search of his home revealed nothing missing except the clothes he had been wearing the previous evening and a leather-bound journal he was known to carry. Most curiously, his overcoat remained hanging in the front hall despite the autumn chill. and his pocket watch, a family heirloom he was never known to be without, sat on his nightstand. The initial investigation focused on possible explanations ranging from voluntary departure to foul play. Records from the Salem Evening News dated October 19, 1898, indicate that police first suspected the doctor may have been called away suddenly to tend to a patient and met with some accident en route. Yet inquiries with all his known patients yielded nothing. No one had summoned him that night. Attention then turned to the doctor's financial situation. Bank records showed his accounts in good standing, with no unusual withdrawals or deposits in the weeks before his disappearance. His will, filed with his attorney, Josiah Prescott, left his estate to the Salem Hospital for the establishment of a ward dedicated to the treatment of psychological disorders, a provision that had been in place for years and suggested no recent contemplation of death or departure. As the investigation progressed, authorities began to piece together Dr. Winthrop's activities in the days leading up to his disappearance. Hospital colleagues reported that the doctor had been conducting research on what he termed inherited psychological imprints, a theory that traumatic experiences could be passed through generations, manifesting as inexplicable fears, compulsions, or recurring dreams in descendants who had no direct exposure to the original trauma. Dr. Montgomery Osgood, who shared offices with Dr. Winthrop, provided authorities with a statement that would significantly alter the direction of the investigation. Phineas had been interviewing the descendants of several old Salem families, Dr. Osgood explained. He believed he was observing patterns of anxiety and psychological disturbance that corresponded to historical traumas experienced by their ancestors. He spoke of one family in particular that seemed to confirm his theories, though he refused to name them, citing patient confidentiality. Dr. Osgood further revealed that in the week before his disappearance, Dr. Winthrop had become increasingly agitated about his findings. He told me he had discovered something that would rewrite our understanding of the human mind, Osgood stated. When I pressed him for details, he said only that the answer had been hidden in plain sight for 2 centuries. This information prompted investigators to examine Dr. Winthrop's office at Salem Hospital more thoroughly. Hidden behind a loose panel in his desk drawer, they discovered a small leather notebook different from his missing journal. Inside were cryptic entries dating back several months, written in a shorthand that took authorities some time to decipher. Once translated, the notes revealed the doctor had been studying 3 families in particular, the Mathers, the Corwins, and the Hawthorns, all names with deep historical connections to Salem. The most recent entries focused almost exclusively on the Corwin lineage, with repeated references to the Judge's House and something called the Inner Room. The Judge's House was quickly identified as the Jonathan Corwin House on Essex Street, one of the few remaining structures in Salem with direct connections to the witch trials of 1692. Judge Jonathan Corwin had been one of the magistrates who presided over the trials, and his house, known locally as the Witch House, still stood as a grim reminder of that dark chapter in Salem's history. At this point, the investigation intersected with local historical records. The house had remained in the Corwin family until 1856, when it was purchased by a wealthy merchant named Bradford Vaughan. After Vaughan's death in 1871, the property passed to his daughter, Constance Vaughan, who still resided there in 1898 at the age of 53. Miss Vaughan lived alone except for 2 servants and was known in Salem society as a reclusive woman, with an intense interest in preserving the historical integrity of her home. When questioned about Dr. Winthrop, Miss Vaughan initially denied any acquaintance with him. However, her housekeeper, Harriet Rhodes, contradicted this claim, stating that the doctor had visited the house at least 3 times in September of 1898. They would meet in the library for hours, Rhodes told investigators. Miss Vaughan instructed me never to disturb them and to deny knowledge of these visits if anyone should ask. Confronted with this testimony, Miss Vaughan reluctantly admitted to meeting with Dr. Winthrop but insisted it was merely regarding her occasional insomnia. The doctor was interested in the history of the house, she conceded, particularly in the original floor plans. I indulged his curiosity as a courtesy, nothing more. This revelation led investigators to request a search of the Corwin House, which Miss Vaughn initially refused. Only when presented with a formal warrant did she reluctantly allow authorities access to her home. The search revealed nothing immediately suspicious, though officers noted that certain rooms in the oldest section of the house were kept locked, with Miss Vaughn claiming the keys had been lost years earlier. As October turned to November, the investigation seemed to reach a standstill. No body had been found, no evidence of struggle discovered, and no confirmed sightings of Dr. Winthrop reported. The case might have gradually faded from public attention had it not been for the unexpected testimony of Josiah Dalton, a private at Fort Lee, who had been on sentry duty the night of October 16th. Dalton, who had been away on training exercises when the initial investigation was conducted, returned to Salem in early November. Upon reading about Dr. Winthrop's disappearance in the newspaper, he came forward with information that would dramatically reshape the inquiry. According to his statement preserved in police records, Dalton had observed a man matching Dr. Winthrop's description walking along the shore road toward Fort Lee shortly after midnight on October 17th. He was moving with purpose, like a man with an appointment, Dalton recalled. What struck me as odd was that he carried no lantern, despite the darkness. When he reached the fort entrance, he paused and looked back toward town for several minutes. Then he turned and continued walking north along the shoreline, past the fort and toward the point. I lost sight of him after that. This testimony established a timeline that placed Dr. Winthrop traveling on foot from Salem proper to Salem Neck during the early morning hours of his disappearance. A subsequent search of the shoreline north of Fort Lee yielded the first physical evidence, a brass button identified as matching those on the waistcoat doctor. Winthrop had been wearing the night he vanished, according to Mrs. Putnam's description. The discovery prompted a more thorough search of the area, including the waters of Salem Harbor and the marshes surrounding Salem Neck. No body was recovered, but investigators did find a peculiar item wedged between rocks near the high tide line, a small brass key of antique design, heavily tarnished but intact. The key bore no identifying marks and matched no locks in Dr. Winthrop's home or office. As the investigation continued into December, attention returned to the Corwin House and its reclusive owner. Records from the Salem Athenaeum revealed that Dr. Winthrop had spent considerable time researching the original architecture of the house, particularly examining old documents that described modifications made to the structure in the early 1700s. Among these records was a mention of concealed spaces created during renovations in 1717, though the specific nature and purpose of these spaces were not detailed. Armed with this information, investigators returned to Miss Vaughn with renewed questions about the locked rooms in her home. Under intense questioning, she finally admitted that one such room contained what she called family archives, documents and artifacts passed down through generations of both the Corwin and Vaughn families. Dr. Winthrop became obsessed with these materials, she confessed. He believed they contained evidence for his theories about inherited trauma. When I realized the direction of his research, I refused him further access. Some family histories are better left undisturbed. When pressed about what specifically had concerned her, Miss Vaughn grew evasive, stating only that the doctor had discovered connections that weren't meant to be found. She denied any knowledge of his whereabouts after their last meeting on October 12th, 4 days before his disappearance. The investigation took another unexpected turn when Dr. Osgood came forward with additional information in late December. He had discovered a hidden compartment in Dr. Winthrop's office desk containing letters exchanged between Winthrop and Dr. Jeremiah Blackwell, a physician at Danvers State Hospital. The correspondence revealed that Dr. Winthrop had been consulting with Blackwell regarding a patient at Danvers, a woman identified only as E.C., who claimed to experience vivid dreams of events from the 1690s. According to the letters, this patient had no prior knowledge of Salem's history, yet could describe in precise detail the interior of buildings that existed during that period, including the original configuration of the Corwin House. Most disturbing were her accounts of the holding room, a space she claimed existed behind the north wall of the cellar where accused witches were allegedly kept before their trials. Historical records contained no official mention of such a space, though rumors had circulated for generations. Dr. Blackwell's final letter to Winthrop, dated October 14, 1898, contained a warning. "I caution you against pursuing this matter further. The patient's condition has deteriorated rapidly since your visits. She now refuses to sleep, claiming, 'He comes through the wall when darkness falls.' Yesterday she scratched a message into her forearm with her fingernails. The judge still presides. For your own well-being, I suggest you abandon this line of inquiry." This discovery prompted a third, more thorough search of the Corwin House, focusing specifically on the cellar. Initial examinations had revealed nothing unusual, but investigators now employed more invasive methods, testing the walls for hollow spaces behind the old stonework. In the northeast corner of the cellar, they discovered an area where the mortar between stones appeared newer than the surrounding material. When this section was carefully removed, it revealed a narrow opening leading to a small chamber approximately 6 feet square. The space had no windows and no other entrance. Inside, the room was empty, save for 3 items placed in the center of the dirt floor. Dr. Winthrop's missing journal, opened to the final entry, a rusted iron key that matched no known lock in the house, and a daguerreotype photograph from the mid-19th century, showing a group of unidentified men standing before what appeared to be a recently excavated tunnel entrance. The final journal entry, dated October 16, 1898, read, "I have confirmed my suspicions beyond any doubt." The oral histories dismissed as superstition contain more truth than our modern sensibilities permit us to acknowledge. The tunnels exist. They were sealed not out of fear of British invasion, as town records claim, but because of what was discovered within them in 1817. Tomorrow night, I will access the entrance at the point and follow the passage to its terminus. Miss V must be made to understand the implications of what her ancestors concealed. The pattern of affliction in the descendants cannot be coincidence. Something was brought back that night, something that has lingered in the psychological landscape of this town for generations. I believe I now understand the true source of the inherited trauma I have observed in my patients. God help me if I am correct. The journal ended there, with no further explanation of what Dr. Winthrop had discovered or what the point referred to. The daguerreotype bore no identifying information beyond a date inscribed on its reverse, August 7, 1847. Miss Vaughn, when confronted with the hidden chamber and its contents, appeared genuinely shocked. "I knew nothing of this space," she insisted. "The house has been in my possession for nearly 30 years, and I have never observed any indication of its existence." When shown the daguerreotype, however, she grew pale and admitted that one of the men pictured appeared to be her grandfather, Bradford Vaughn. The investigation now expanded to include historical records regarding tunnels beneath Salem. Town archives confirmed that a network of smuggling tunnels had indeed existed during the maritime era, connecting various wharves and warehouses to allow merchants to move goods without paying customs duties. Most of these passages had been officially sealed or collapsed by the mid-1800s, though rumors persisted of undocumented tunnels stretching as far as Salem Neck and Winter Island. Of particular interest was a notation in the harbormaster's log from 1817 regarding an unexpected cavity discovered during wharf repairs near Darby Street. The entry mentioned that the cavity appeared to be man-made and extended in the direction of the old town center. The record indicated that the opening was immediately sealed under orders from the selectmen, with no further explanation provided. Comparing this information with maps of Salem from various periods, investigators identified a potential pattern. The Corwin House, Fort Lee, and the site of the 1817 discovery formed a rough triangle across Salem's geography. If tunnels connected these points, as Dr. Winthrop seemed to believe, they would form a network beneath the city that had remained largely undocumented and unexplored for centuries. Armed with this theory, authorities organized a search of the shoreline near Fort Lee, focusing on what locals called the Point, a rocky outcropping extending into Salem Harbor. After days of methodical examination, they discovered a narrow fissure in the rock face that had been recently disturbed. Clearing away loose stones revealed an opening large enough for a man to pass through if he crawled. A team of officers entered the passage on January 7, 1899, nearly 3 months after Dr. Winthrop's disappearance. What they discovered was a narrow tunnel hewn from the living rock, descending at a gentle slope beneath the harbor. The air within was damp but surprisingly fresh, suggesting some form of ventilation system. The passage showed signs of both ancient construction and more recent maintenance, with support beams of varying ages reinforcing the ceiling at regular intervals. The officers proceeded approximately half a mile before reaching a junction where the tunnel branched in 3 directions. Here they found the first sign of Dr. Winthrop, a piece of torn fabric matching his waistcoat, caught on a rough edge of rock. The fabric appeared to have been torn recently, with no significant deterioration or mold growth. The search party split to investigate each branch. 2 passages proved to be dead ends, terminating in collapsed sections after several hundred yards. The third, however, continued beneath the city in the direction of Essex Street and the Corwin House. This tunnel showed more elaborate construction than the others, with brick-lined walls replacing the rough-hewn stone. At regular intervals, small chambers opened off the main passage, each empty save for the remnants of rotted wooden crates and barrels. According to the officer's report, these spaces gave the impression of storage areas long abandoned, perhaps dating to the smuggling operations of the previous century. Approximately 1 mile from the entrance, the searchers made a disturbing discovery. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber approximately 20 feet square, its walls lined with shelves carved directly into the stone. On these shelves rested dozens of leather-bound volumes, their spines unmarked. A wooden table stood in the center of the room, its surface covered with papers weighted down by a single object: Dr. Winthrop's pocket watch, the one that had supposedly been left behind on his nightstand. The papers proved to be pages torn from the doctor's journal, entries that did not appear in the volume found in the hidden chamber of the Corwin House. These fragments detailed Winthrop's exploration of the tunnels on the night of October 16th to 17th, described in increasingly agitated handwriting. The final page contained a passage that would haunt the investigation. "I have reached the repository. The volumes confirm everything. Records kept by Judge Segas, separate from the official transcripts, detailed observations of the accused before and during their confinement. These were no mere trials, but experiments in the manipulation of fear." He was studying them, documenting the progression of their terror as systematically as any modern scientist. And for what purpose? The final volume suggests an answer too horrifying to contemplate. Something was being cultivated in these subjects, something harvested at the moment of maximum dread. I hear footsteps in the passage behind me. Someone has followed. They must not find these records. I will proceed deeper and attempt to reach the Corwin House chamber from below. The search party continued beyond this chamber, following a tunnel that narrowed considerably as it proceeded. The passage showed signs of recent disturbance. Footprints in the dust that forensic analysis later confirmed matched Dr. Winthrop's shoes. These tracks continued for approximately half a mile before reaching another junction. Here the officers made their most significant discovery: a sealed iron door set into the wall of the tunnel, its surface covered with elaborate engravings of intertwined figures that one officer described as contorted in attitudes of extreme anguish. The door bore no handle or visible locking mechanism, only a small keyhole at its center. The rusted key found in the Corwin House chamber fit this lock. When turned, it produced a grinding sound of metal against metal, but the door remained sealed. No amount of force could budge it, and the search party eventually abandoned their efforts to open it, after noting that the temperature in the tunnel had dropped precipitously near the door, with their breath becoming visible, despite the relative warmth elsewhere in the passage. The footprints told a final, chilling story. Dr. Winthrop had apparently stood before this door for some time, pacing in a small area. Then his tracks proceeded down a side passage that, when followed, led directly to the hidden chamber in the Corwin House cellar. Inside this chamber, a section of wall could be rotated to provide access from the tunnel system, explaining how the journal, key, and photograph had been placed there. But if Dr. Winthrop had reached this chamber, why had he left these items behind? And where had he gone afterward? No footprints led back out through the conventional entrance to the cellar, suggesting he had returned to the tunnel system. Yet no trace of him was found in any of the passages explored by the search party. The investigation officially concluded in February 1899 with a report submitted to the Essex County Court declaring Dr. Phineas Winthrop missing, presumed deceased. The tunnels were ordered sealed for public safety, with brick walls constructed at key access points. The hidden chamber in the Corwin House was closed, and the rotating wall mechanism disabled. Miss Constance Vaughan sold the house shortly after the investigation concluded and relocated to Boston, where she lived in seclusion until her death in 1907. In her will, she directed that all family papers and records be burned, a request that was carried out by her executor. The volumes discovered in the underground chamber were taken into police custody and subsequently transferred to the Essex Institute for Historical Preservation. However, according to Institute records, the collection was destroyed in a small fire in 1902 that affected only the cabinet in which they were stored. No transcriptions or photographs of their contents were ever made public. Dr. Montgomery Osgood continued his practice at Salem Hospital until 1903, when he abruptly resigned his position and moved to Switzerland. In correspondence with colleagues, he cited a deterioration of the intellectual environment in Salem as his reason for departure. He never returned to America. The most curious epilogue to this mystery came in 1923, when renovations to the old Salem Hospital building on Charter Street uncovered a sealed envelope hidden within the cornerstone. The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with a message written in what handwriting experts confirmed was Dr. Winthrop's script. To whoever discovers this record, I have gone to find the truth that lies beyond the door. What Judge Corwin began did not end with him. The experiment continues through the generations, feeding on our collective fears. I have discovered why certain families in Salem never escape their ancestral shadows. We are subjects, not citizens, observed through the keyhole by something that hungers for our dread. If you are reading this, they have permitted it as part of the procedure. Look to the appointments at Danvers. The pattern is there for those with eyes to see. The letter was submitted to the Salem Historical Society but was reported missing from their archives by 1925. All official records of the investigation into Dr. Winthrop's disappearance were subsequently consolidated and sealed by court order until 1969, when they were supposedly transferred to the Massachusetts State Archives. However, when researchers attempted to access these files in the 1970s, no record of their receipt could be found. What makes this case particularly disturbing is not merely the disappearance of Dr. Winthrop, but the systematic erasure of evidence surrounding it. The doctor's extensive research on inherited psychological trauma disappeared along with the man himself. His personal library, reportedly containing rare volumes on esoteric psychology, was sold at auction with no catalog preserved. His colleagues at Salem Hospital, when interviewed years later, often claimed poor memory of the details or refused to discuss the case entirely. The Joshua Ward House on Washington Street, another historic Salem building with connections to the witch trial era, became the focus of renewed interest following Dr. Winthrop's disappearance. Ward House had been built on the site where Sheriff George Corwin, nephew of Judge Jonathan Corwin, had lived and died. Sheriff Corwin had been responsible for the arrests and executions during the witch trials, earning the nickname the Strangler for his harsh methods of interrogation. In 1899, the owners of Ward House reported unusual disturbances, cold spots, inexplicable noises, and feelings of being watched. Several visitors claimed to have seen a tall figure in outdated clothing standing at the top of the stairs. Most striking was the testimony of a local photographer who, when developing photographs taken at a holiday gathering in the house, discovered the image of a man standing in the background of one picture. The figure bore a striking resemblance to Dr. Winthrop, though the photograph had been taken weeks after his disappearance. Similar reports emerged from other historic properties throughout Salem in the years following the doctor's vanishing. The Pickman House on Charter Street, the Ropes Mansion on Essex Street, and the House of Seven Gables all experienced what witnesses described as visitations or presences that had not been noted before 1898. In each case, the descriptions shared common elements: a tall, thin man with intense eyes and a scholarly demeanor who would appear briefly in doorways or at the periphery of vision, only to vanish when directly approached. These sightings gradually diminished in frequency, but never entirely ceased. As recently as 1967, a night watchman at the Peabody Essex Museum reported encountering a figure matching Dr. Winthrop's description in the Phillips Library, where the museum's historical documents are stored. The figure was reportedly examining materials related to the witch trials, and when approached, asked a single question: "Have you seen what moves behind the masks we wear?" Before the watchman could respond, the figure walked into an adjoining room and, despite an immediate search, could not be located. The Danvers State Hospital, which figured prominently in Dr. Winthrop's research, has its own curious connection to the mystery. In 1898, the year of the doctor's disappearance, Danvers established the second nursing school in Massachusetts and built a nurse's residence called Gray Gables. According to hospital records, the ornate door knocker on the front entrance of Gray Gables was salvaged from the demolished Hathorne family mansion that once stood on the site of the hospital. An inscription accompanying the knocker noted its age, stating it was ancient when the witches of Salem were tried. More disturbing still were entries in the administrative logs of Danvers from 1900 to 1910, indicating a marked increase in patients admitted for what was termed Salem-specific melancholia, a condition characterized by recurring nightmares about being observed or pursued through underground passages, accompanied by an overwhelming sense of inherited guilt. These patients frequently shared no family connection, but exhibited identical symptoms, often claiming they could feel the judge watching. Most disturbing, many patients experiencing these symptoms came from families that had lived in Salem for generations, including descendants of those involved in the witch trials, both accusers and accused. The medical director of Danvers from 1908 to 1912, Dr. Frederick Packard, took particular interest in these cases and began his own investigation into possible environmental or sociological causes. His research was never published formally, but personal notes discovered after his death referred repeatedly to Winthrop's theory and the possibility that psychological contagion could be transmitted across generations through mechanisms yet to be understood by science. Packard's notes abruptly ended in November 1912 with a cryptic entry: "I have found the door. God help me. Winthrop was right." Packard resigned his position shortly thereafter, citing health concerns, and moved to a remote area of Vermont where he lived as a recluse until his death in 1927. His personal papers, which reportedly included extensive notes on his Salem research, were bequeathed to Harvard Medical School, but were destroyed in a fire during transport, another in the series of convenient destructions that have plagued documentation of this case. The most scientifically intriguing aspect of the Winthrop disappearance involves the pattern of psychological symptoms that he had identified before he vanished. The doctor had documented cases of specific phobias, recurring nightmares, and behavioral compulsions that seemed to follow family lines in Salem, often manifesting in individuals who had no knowledge of similar symptoms in their ancestors. He termed this phenomenon echotrauma and hypothesized that severe psychological distress could somehow imprint itself on future generations, creating unconscious patterns of thought and behavior that repeated across time. This theory, radical for its era, bears striking resemblance to modern concepts of epigenetic inheritance, the scientifically validated process by which environmental factors can affect the expression of genes without altering the underlying DNA sequence, potentially transmitting traits across generations. Research in the late 20th and early 21st centuries has demonstrated that extreme stress and trauma can indeed create heritable changes in gene expression, raising the uncomfortable possibility that Dr. Winthrop may have been on the verge of discovering a scientific principle that wouldn't be validated by mainstream science for over a century. What sets the Winthrop case apart from other historical disappearances is the pattern of secondary vanishings that followed in its wake. Between 1899 and 1925, no fewer than 7 individuals who investigated various aspects of Dr. Winthrop's work subsequently disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. These included Professor Edmund Garfield, a historian from Boston University, who attempted to compile a comprehensive account of the tunnel system beneath Salem in 1901. His unfinished manuscript vanished along with him during a research trip to the city. Was Madeline Whipple, a nurse at Danvers State Hospital who assisted Dr. Packard in his research on Salem-specific melancholia. She disappeared from her quarters at Gray Gables in 1910, leaving behind only a journal with increasingly paranoid entries about being observed through the walls. Thomas Armitage, a librarian at the Essex Institute who cataloged the volumes recovered from the underground chamber before their destruction in the 1902 fire. He was found dead in his home in 1905, apparently from natural causes, though the medical examiner noted unusual contortions in his facial muscles, as though he died in a state of extreme terror. Detective Harlan Pierce of the Salem Police Department, who led the original investigation into Winthrop's disappearance. In 1912, Pierce began re-examining the case on his own initiative after claiming to have received new information. He disappeared while exploring the shoreline near Fort Lee, where the tunnel entrance had been sealed 13 years earlier. Josephine Marsh, a journalist for the Boston Herald who researched the Winthrop case for a series of articles in 1918. Her editors pulled the series after the first installment when Marsh reported being followed by a tall, thin man in outdated clothing who disappeared when confronted. Marsh herself vanished 3 days later, leaving behind interview notes that mentioned a pattern of deliberate suppression surrounding the case. Dr. Walter Cavendish, a psychologist from New York who attempted to validate Winthrop's theory of echotrauma by studying families with long histories in Salem. In 1921, after presenting preliminary findings at a medical conference, Cavendish reported receiving anonymous threats. His body was discovered in his hotel room the following day, officially ruled a suicide, though several colleagues disputed this conclusion. Richard Vaughan, the grandnephew of Constance Vaughan and inheritor of the few family papers that survived her ordered destruction. In 1925, Richard began researching his family's connection to the Winthrop case, but abandoned the project after reportedly experiencing nightmares so severe he required hospitalization. Upon his release, he relocated to California and refused all further inquiries related to the matter. In 1930, he was declared missing after failing to return from a solitary hiking trip in the Sierra Nevada mountains. This pattern of disappearances and deterrence created what one researcher later termed a conspiracy of silence around the Winthrop case. By the mid-20th century, most substantive records had been lost, destroyed, or sealed, and first-hand witnesses had either died or refused to discuss the matter. The few remaining fragments of documentation were scattered across multiple archives, often misfiled or incorrectly cataloged in what appears, in retrospect, to be a systematic effort to obscure the connections between them. The physical evidence of the tunnel system itself remains the most tantalizing aspect of the mystery. Official records state that all access points were sealed in 1899, yet reports of unauthorized explorations persisted throughout the 20th century. In 1942, during civil defense preparations for potential coastal attacks during World War II, a survey of Salem's underground infrastructure rediscovered a section of the tunnel network near Darby Street. Military personnel briefly explored the passage before sealing it as a security risk, but their report, classified at the time and only declassified in 1978, described extensive modifications of unknown purpose to the original smuggling tunnel, including walls of unusual composition that appeared to absorb sound. In 1967, construction workers excavating for a new building foundation near the site of the old Salem Hospital uncovered what appeared to be another tunnel entrance. Before archaeologists could properly document the find, a collapse occurred that buried the opening under tons of debris. Workers at the site reported unusual circumstances preceding the collapse, including whispers coming from the darkness and a sudden drop in temperature. The construction company abandoned the original building plans and relocated the project to another site, citing unstable ground conditions. Most recently, in 1998, exactly 1 century after Dr. Winthrop's disappearance, advanced ground-penetrating radar surveys, conducted as part of an archaeological study of historic Salem, detected anomalous hollow spaces extending beneath several key historic properties, including the Witch House and the Joshua Ward House. The pattern of these spaces corresponded closely with the triangular network hypothesized during the original investigation. Attempts to access these spaces for further study were denied by the City Council, citing preservation concerns for the historic structures above. What are we to make of this century-old mystery and its lingering questions? Was Dr. Winthrop simply a victim of accident or foul play during his nocturnal exploration of Salem's forgotten tunnels? Or did he, as his final writings suggest, uncover something far more disturbing, a hidden pattern within Salem's troubled history that continues to affect its residents through generations of inherited trauma? Perhaps most unsettling is the possibility raised by Dr. Winthrop's final letter, that the manipulation of fear documented in Judge Corwin's private records was not merely an aberration of 17th century justice, but part of a deliberate process, one that continued long after the witch trials ended, and perhaps continues still, with some unknown purpose that eludes our modern understanding. The psychological impact of historical trauma on subsequent generations has become a legitimate field of scientific inquiry in recent decades. Studies of descendants of Holocaust survivors, former slaves, and indigenous populations subjected to cultural genocide have demonstrated measurable psychological and even physiological effects that persist across generations. Dr. Winthrop's theory of ecotrauma, once dismissed as pseudoscientific speculation, now seems eerily prescient in light of these findings. What distinguishes the Salem case, if we take Dr. Winthrop's research at face value, is the suggestion that the original trauma was not merely an unfortunate historical event, but a deliberate experiment, one conducted with methodical precision and documented in records that have been systematically removed from public access. The recurring patterns of nightmares and psychological distress reported by descendants of Salem families raise uncomfortable questions. Are these merely the psychological echoes of a collective historical trauma, or could they, as Dr. Winthrop suggested, be evidence of something more deliberate, a process of psychological manipulation that continues to reverberate through time. The sealed iron door discovered in the tunnel system, with its disturbing engravings and resistance to all efforts at opening, stands as perhaps the most evocative physical symbol of this mystery. What lies beyond that door? What knowledge did Dr. Winthrop gain that compelled him to leave his comfortable life and venture into the darkness beneath Salem? And who or what may have followed him there? These questions remain unanswered, and perhaps that is for the best. As Dr. Winthrop himself wrote in one of the few preserved fragments of his research notes, "Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. Some knowledge, once gained, cannot be unlearned. The mind, like nature, abhors a vacuum, but there are spaces within our understanding that should perhaps remain empty, lest what rushes in to fill them prove more terrible than our ignorance." Today, Salem thrives as a tourist destination, its witch trial history commodified into attractions, museums, and seasonal celebrations. Few visitors or even residents are aware of the Winthrop disappearance or the deeper, darker mysteries it hinted at beneath the city's carefully preserved historical facade. The Witch House stands open to tours, its hidden chamber sealed and forgotten. Fort Lee is a public park, its connection to the underground passages erased from informational displays. The Danvers State Hospital closed in 1992, its imposing Kirkbride building partially demolished and converted to luxury apartments. Yet for those who know where to look, traces of the mystery remain. In the archives of the Peabody Essex Museum, a single page of Dr. Winthrop's journal survives, misfiled among unrelated documents. On certain winter nights, locals still report seeing a tall, thin figure walking purposefully along the shore road toward Salem Neck, vanishing when approached. And in the oldest families of Salem, the dreams continue. Dreams of narrow passages, watching eyes, and a sealed door beyond which something waits with infinite patience. For Dr. Phineas Winthrop, the most terrifying mystery in Salem's history became his final case, one that consumed not only his professional interest, but ultimately his very existence. The true nature of what he discovered remains hidden, like the tunnels themselves, beneath layers of time, deliberate obscurity, and perhaps something darker still, a conspiracy reaching back through centuries, connecting the judges of 1692 to forces still active in our modern world. As Dr. Winthrop wrote in his final known message, "We are subjects, not citizens, observed through the keyhole by something that hungers for our dread." The question that haunts this mystery is not merely what happened to Dr. Winthrop, but whether his disappearance was the end of the story, or merely another chapter in a darker narrative that continues to unfold beneath the surface of history, affecting generations who never suspect the true source of their inherited fears. For those who have followed this account to its end, a word of caution: pay attention to your dreams in the coming nights. If you find yourself standing before an iron door engraved with twisted figures, do not attempt to open it, even if you discover you somehow possess the key. Some mysteries of Salem are best left unsolved, some doors best left sealed. As for Dr. Phineas Winthrop, no trace of him was ever found. His legacy lives on only in whispered stories and in the troubled sleep of those who delve too deeply into Salem's darkest corners. The most terrifying mystery in Salem's history remains unsolved, not because the answers are unavailable, but because they may be too disturbing to acknowledge. The truth is there for those with eyes to see, or perhaps, as Dr. Winthrop ultimately discovered, for those with eyes that are seen. Salem's historic properties, particularly those connected to the witch trial era, continue to draw paranormal investigators and researchers interested in the psychological effects of historical trauma. The Witch House, the Joshua Ward House, and the House of Seven Gables all report ongoing unusual phenomena that defy conventional explanation. Visitors to these sites occasionally report encounters with a scholarly-looking man who appears briefly before vanishing, often near doorways or stairwells. The tunnels beneath Salem, though officially sealed, continue to capture local imagination. Urban explorers occasionally claim to have found access points, though none have produced verifiable evidence of extensive exploration. City officials consistently denied the existence of any accessible tunnel network, citing public safety concerns. Yet ground-penetrating radar surveys continue to detect anomalous hollow spaces beneath key historic sites, suggesting that significant portions of the system remain intact, if inaccessible. Perhaps most intriguing are the continuing patterns of psychological phenomena reported by descendants of Salem's oldest families. A 2005 study conducted by researchers from Miskatonic University's Department of Psychology found statistically significant correlations between ancestry tracing back to Salem's founding families and specific patterns of recurring nightmares, anxiety disorders, and phobias related to confined spaces and observation. These patterns showed stronger correlation than could be explained by cultural transmission alone, suggesting the possibility of inherited trauma, as Dr. Winthrop had theorized over a century earlier. The researchers noted that subjects often reported remarkably similar dream imagery, despite having no prior knowledge of each other's experiences. Narrow passages, sealed doors, and the sensation of being observed by something behind or beyond a wall. Most reported experiencing these dreams first in early adolescence, with the frequency and intensity increasing with age. Several subjects independently described a tall, thin figure who would appear in these dreams, sometimes offering to lead them through the passages, sometimes warning them to turn back. The study was never published in mainstream psychological journals, and the raw data was reportedly lost when the university's archives suffered water damage in 2008. The lead researcher, Dr. Eleanor Marsh, retired shortly after completing the study and declined all requests for interviews regarding her findings. Her research assistant, who spoke anonymously to a local newspaper in 2010, claimed that the study had been suppressed due to institutional pressure from unnamed sources. In 2015, renovations at the former Danvers State Hospital complex uncovered a sealed room in the basement of the administration building. According to construction workers, the room contained only a desk, a chair, and a single sheet of paper with handwritten text. Before the contents could be properly documented, a small fire broke out, destroying the paper. The fire's cause was officially ruled as electrical, though workers reported no active wiring in that section of the building. The room was subsequently sealed during renovations, its existence not mentioned in official reports. Most recently, in 2020, digital restoration of damaged archives from the Essex Institute revealed fragments of correspondence between Dr. Winthrop and colleagues in Europe, suggesting that his research extended far beyond Salem. In one partially recovered letter, Winthrop referenced similar patterns of echo trauma in locations associated with historical witch trials in England, Germany, and France. He hypothesized a network of observation points established at these locations, though the nature and purpose of this network remained unexplained in the surviving fragments. The most compelling recent development came in 2021, when an elderly resident of Salem, claiming to be a distant relative of Constance Vaughn, approached the Salem Historical Society with a small brass key allegedly passed down through her family. The woman, who requested anonymity, stated that the key had been accompanied by a warning: "Never return this to the door." The key was submitted for metallurgical analysis, which confirmed its age as consistent with late 17th or early 18th century manufacture. Most striking was the unusual composition of the metal, which contained trace elements not typically found in brass objects from that period. Before further analysis could be completed, the key disappeared from the secure storage facility where it was being held. Security footage showed no unauthorized access, and staff reported no disruption in normal procedures. The elderly woman who had donated the key could not be located for further questioning, and subsequent investigation revealed no record of her claimed identity or address. For those interested in the Winthrop case, These recent developments offer tantalizing hints, but few definitive answers. The pattern of evidence appearing briefly before being destroyed or disappearing continues, suggesting either extraordinary coincidence or deliberate interference, a conspiracy of silence that has persisted for over a century. What truth lies at the heart of this mystery? Was Dr. Winthrop simply an obsessive researcher who met with accident or foul play during his unauthorized explorations, or did he, as his writings suggest, uncover something more profound, a hidden mechanism behind Salem's troubled history that continues to affect its residents through generations of inherited trauma? The sealed iron door in the tunnel system, with its disturbing engravings and resistance to opening, remains the most potent symbol of this enduring mystery. What lies beyond that door? What knowledge did Dr. Winthrop gain that compelled him to abandon his comfortable life and venture into the darkness, and who or what may have followed him there? As you walk the historic streets of Salem today, passing centuries-old buildings where history and tourism coexist in uneasy partnership, consider the possibility that beneath your feet lies another Salem, a network of forgotten passages where the echoes of the past continue to reverberate. And perhaps in quiet moments, listen carefully for footsteps that follow your own, but stop when you turn to look. The footsteps of a doctor who sought knowledge in the darkness and became part of the mystery he tried to solve. For Dr. Phineas Winthrop and those who followed his research, the most terrifying mystery in Salem's history was not the witch trials themselves, but what those trials might have concealed. A purpose beyond persecution, a design invisible to history yet continuing to shape the present through the most intimate mechanism possible, the human mind and its inherited fears. As Dr. Winthrop wrote in his final known communication, the experiment continues through the generations. 125 years after his disappearance, the question remains, what experiment, to what end, and under whose observation? The answers, if they exist, remain hidden behind sealed doors, in missing archives, and perhaps in the dreams of those who unknowingly carry the echo of past terrors in their blood and bones.